Welcome to the land far away, where we discuss culture from a certain point of view. Horror is such a peculiar genre. Arguably, its main goal is to strike fear into the hearts of readers or viewers. However, even when done laughably unscary, a horror movie can still be vastly enjoyable. Compare this to comedies, which are borderline unwatchable when made unfunny. I'm not trying to argue that making a good horror movie is easy, but it just surprises me how many awful horror movies there are that became cult classics despite their quality. Today I would like to discuss one that you most likely haven't heard about, even though in some circles it's hailed as the worst horror movie ever made. And it is an incredibly fun, cringy watch. But before we start, let me know in the comments section what in your opinion is the worst horror movie ever made. Let's have a chat about it. Also, a disclaimer. I'm not doing this video with mean intentions. I see a big distinction between a cynical, trashy Hollywood cash grab and an independent flick that reeks of incompetence, but was made with a passion for the medium. I believe the movie I'm going to discuss falls into the second, more noble category. With all of that out of the way, let's delve into the Russian 1993 cult classic entitled Monsters. I will start with a review, and then finish with a selection of my favorite scenes. Despite being garbage, the movie is actually pretty significant for historical reasons, because it's widely considered to be the first modern Russian horror. Let's remember that under the communist regime, horror was a forbidden genre. I explain the reasons for that in my other video, a link to which you'll find in the description. A few Russian movies that could be classified as horror were shot way back in the silent era. After that, 70 years of the communist ban followed. Only after the fall of the Soviet Union late in December of 1991, the ban was lifted, and Monsters became the first movie to embrace the once forbidden genre. This background explains why Russian cinema, despite being able to produce brilliant, award-worthy movies in the past, had absolutely no experience when it comes to shooting horror movies. Monsters serves as the crowning evidence of this weakness. The movie's premise is quite telling. It reads as follows. A group of 5 scientists goes to the radioactive zone to conduct research on contaminated areas. They arrive just before terrible things start happening in the zone. Enormous rats, lizards, turtles, crayfish, beetles, and crows begin emerging from every crack in the nuclear reactor and the streets of the nearby abandoned city, and they start devouring all the people who happen to be nearby. If you know your history, you're probably aware of the Silver Age of horror movies, and the sci-fi horror of the 1950s in particular. Giant creature movies were emblematic of that decade. They stemmed from the fear of nuclear war and the horrible effects of radiation. The original 1954 Godzilla is arguably the most famous example of that trend. Let's also mention Them, an American horror movie about giant radiation-mutated ants, which was released in 1954 as well. The premise of Monsters has similar roots because the movie was highly influenced by the Chernobyl disaster of 1986. When I think about it, Monsters is basically a 1950s movie released in the 1990s. I would argue, though, that it rocks special effects subpar even to these oldies. The movie was written, directed, and produced by Sergei Kuchkov. It's worth adding that he was a first-timer in all 3 of these roles. Later he would direct only one more movie, and write a few screenplays. He gained much more recognition as a producer. His talents and failures are here on full display. The movie is awful, but it was shot on a respectable budget. Just look at how much army equipment they were able to use. Plus, they secured some huge locations to portray the abandoned city. Or at least they tried to secure them. Anyway, that's a mark of a good producer. The cast is mostly competent, but it's hard to tell based on this movie alone. I'm hesitant to criticize them because, for example, Georgy Nikolenko, who plays the Russian Ron Swanson, has been acting since the early 1970s. The same goes for Vladimir Antonik, who plays Don Swanson. He's another screen veteran. Meanwhile, Boris Sherbakov, who is the main leading man here, has been active since the 1960s, and has received numerous prestigious awards since then. You'll remember his face instantly because he's the only guy in the cast who is blonde, and doesn't have a moustache. Boris's character is ingeniously named Boris, so I'll be calling him Russian Dolph Lundgren instead. Probably the weakest link here is the only actress in the cast, Ella Safari, as Russian Ellen Ripley. I think it's rather telling that she was active in the movie business for only 1 year, and starred in a total of 3 movies, including Monsters. I'm not calling the cast talentless, but it needs to be said that they did a pathetic job here. They mostly underact and don't convey any emotions, even when their comrades die horrible deaths in front of their eyes. I especially like the helicopter pilot, who shoots down giant crows one after another, but seems to be completely unruffled about it. I guess it's a regular day in the life of a Russian pilot. Up to a certain point, the screenplay is passable. The zone is properly shrouded in mystery. Dolph and Ellen turn on their internal monologues from time to time, which is an old literary trope, often used by H.P. Lovecraft among others. Suddenly people start to vanish, but we don't know what's killing them. The scientists find mutated plants. Then they discuss the possibility of mutant animals existing. We are presented with some disturbing, actual pictures. The tension is allowed to build up nicely. But then it drops to absolute zero when we finally get to see the monsters attack. What's really weird about the screenplay is that the plot lasts for about 30 minutes. What follows next is 50 minutes of shame, by which I mean pathetic action scenes with hardly any dialogue. Once the Russian army enters the zone, the story stops dead. From now on it's just Dolph, Ellen, and Ron, running around like idiots, trying to fight off the animals. In the end the former 2 escape in a car, and we are left with absolutely the worst ending credits of all time. It's easy to criticize Monsters for wooden acting, a retro soundtrack, and the ridiculous romantic subplot. The movie also features some of the worst editing you'll ever see. Most scenes drag unbearably, while action scenes have more cuts than a Liam Neeson thriller. However, what really pushes Monsters from the category of bad movies to the worst movies ever made are the special effects. As mentioned before, the titular monsters are played by real animals, primarily rats and turtles. These were filmed separately from the actors against the backdrop of toy-like scenery of houses and vehicles. So in the movie you hardly ever see an animal and a person in the same frame, even during a head-on fight. However, I would argue that what's even worse than this archaic technique is the choice of animals. I think we'll all agree that sharks, snakes, and spiders are scary. But virtually no one is afraid of turtles. Doesn't this rat, who is presented as a vicious killing machine, look cute? This clash is what makes Monsters so hilarious and enjoyable. I personally believe that the movie is up there with worst horror movies of all times, such as Ed Wood's Plan 9 from Outer Space. Would you agree, based on my review? What are some awful horror movies that you enjoy? Please leave a comment, and consider liking the video, and subscribing to the channel. Until next time. Bye.